The Arizona Cardinals, their offseason in 60 seconds. Signed Zaven Collins to a short extension. Yelta Froholt to a short extension. They're starting center, both 2 years, about 12, 14 million. Brought in Justin Jones, Jonah Williams, Sean Murphy Bunting, Bilal Nichols, Mac Wilson in free agency. Traded Rondale Moore as part of the Desmond Ridder trade, and then they released Desmond Ridder. Hollywood Brown that goes to the Chiefs in free agency. Draft picks, they had 1,000 of them. Marvin Harrison Jr., 4th overall. Darius Robinson also in the first round. Cornerback Max Melton in the second round. Trey Benson, Isaiah Adams, and Tip Ryman, tight end, in the third round. And then Elijah Jones as well. They had 4 third-round picks. My God. Blue chip check-in for the Arizona Cardinals. I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on this. I had 0.
I have 1. I'm going to give it to Budda Baker. And I
thought you were going to do Kyler.
I know. I wanted to. Trust me, I wanted to, but he was kind of in the Geno category where it's like my heart wants to, but I'm willing to concede that it's probably not there.
So full disclosure, I had 0, but then I said, think it depends on what you want to do with Budda Baker. So I left the door open for you if you wanted to walk into it.
Baker, I'm willing to do it. He's made a couple All-Pros. He's been like to 5 straight Pro Bowls. And I think it would be more obvious that he is that caliber of player if his entire job wasn't just putting out fires on one of the worst defenses.
Yeah, there's the worst defense in the NFL. Yeah.
Yeah, like if he was playing, even just totally above average defense, I think he would be clear that he's a really special player.
The other name I wanted to at least mention here is that Trey McBride is on the cusp of being like a really good NFL player.
He could take that leap this year. Like it would not be crazy.
Let's see it for 1 more year. And then let's have that conversation about McBride. What significant question marks does this team have in your mind?
We'll dig into it, but the whole defense, man.
Yeah, it's almost a silly thing to ask about this team specifically, just because they have so many holes. Like in the interior, on the offensive line, corner is still a big question, even though they've added bodies there. The edge room with Ojulari hurt and Darius Robinson missing the first 4 games of the season. I think every group on defense has a depressed ceiling. So we'll get into all of that. What do you watch in the first month of the season with these Arizona Cardinals?
I want to see what the run game looks like. And I know that is, kind of stupid to say after they just drafted one of the coolest wide receiver prospects ever. But I just want to see the run game, man. Because this was, I kind of talked about with Sean Payton, how Sean Payton is very much a guy who wants to run every single concept under the sun. The Cardinals kind of did that. If you look at almost...
They absolutely did that.
Yeah, if you look at almost every run split, they are like smack dead in the middle, somewhere between 14th to 20th in the league. Except for power, they were a little bit closer to the top. And then option stuff, which that's kind of ambiguous because you can tie a lot of different run concepts to that. But they did do a lot of option. And obviously they had Josh Dobbs playing some quarterback for them. And then Kyler Murray comes back and they do some of that. So they just do a little bit of everything in the run game. And it's really fun to watch. And now you're going to get a full year of Kyler, hopefully. But you're going into the season with him as this is your plan at quarterback. Obviously, they're going to do some stuff with him. And then your running back duo is really cool. Connor can be your kind of workhorse, stable back. He's got a lot of power to him. And then Trey Benson, dude, going to be a couple of plays where he runs into his own lineman's back. But man, when he gets out in space, his balance, his size, his explosiveness, it's a lot of kind of what makes Kenneth Walker special. Like there's some similarities there. So I just think that this could be a really, really fun run game.
It was the most efficient running game in the league in the back half of last season. Like there's no imagination necessary here. You're not even projecting. And I think Drew Petzing does a really good job of just conceiving of what that area of the offense should look like. I was talking to him this summer just about how varied the run game was and just discussing how do you make sure you're not overloading guys? If you're going to run 20 different run concepts, the danger of that becomes you do too many things to be good at any one thing. And his answer, and this has been something that's come up with multiple different offensive coaches, but they're clearly better at accomplishing this, is you just kind of teach it conceptually where even if other people are doing slightly different things, like a deuce is a deuce is a deuce. Like the double team that you're running is the same across enough different concepts that you're just drilling down on what that feels like for the two guys who are doing it. And then some of the other moving parts change. And so I think that they just did a really good job of that. Like just, all right, if we can take the component parts from 4 different runs and we make sure we're really good at those, can we have all of these different things that we can trot out there? And one of the things that they do really well is their center moves extremely well. And so it gives them a chance to pull him and just do some things that a lot of other teams in the NFL can't. And yeah, but they did a bunch of stuff last year where it was the run game and some of the play action things off of it where I was like, I don't think I've ever seen that before. like a weird like second tight end insert, and then for whatever reason the tight end who was on the outside is the one that's like releasing, like just little tiny wrinkles that are so different than a lot of things you see with NFL teams in the run game and the play action game specifically. And I think that it has really set them up for success even without a lot of dominant players up front. I mean, I think that they have like a decent offensive line with some intriguing pieces, but nobody that's like a road grader.
Yeah, I'm gonna say about Petzing what I just said about Buda Baker. If he had the horses on offense, I think it would be clear that he is one of the cooler offensive play callers in the league. Just last year, they didn't have any guys, and they didn't have their quarterback for half the year. Now that they've got some guys, it might become a little clearer.
All right, so let's get to that. What am I watching the first month of the year? What does this offense look like in year two? Because they were excellent on the ground, and Kyler looked so much better in his second four starts than his first four starts. So I looked at the numbers because I was just curious. His first four starts of the year, his EPA per dropback was equivalent to what Sam Howell's would have been over the course of the entire season.
Don't
The
tell me
second
that. I
four,
don't want to hear that.
just letting you know, that San Francisco game, that first one had some rough moments in it. His second four starts of the year, that EPA per dropback would have been between Patrick Mahomes and Matthew Stafford over the course of the year. So you could feel, and that's a very small sample, it's worth acknowledging, but you could feel his comfort level grow as he got more time within this offense, because it's very different than anything else he has previously been asked to do at any single level of football. And so if you can build some optimism about what he looks like in year two of this, you drop in Marvin Harrison, you have year two of Trey McBride. I think there is a real reason to think that this group as a whole can take a pretty monstrous step forward with just more time on task and more pure talent dropped into the equation.
And to your point, Kyler took to some of the new stuff that they were doing quite well, like being
Yeah.
under center and really being confident on some of the play action throws that they were making and some of the boots that they were doing and getting him moving instead of, because, you can obviously use a mobile quarterback as a runner, but you can also just move him, getting him outside of the pocket in the passing game. And they did a little bit, Petzing did a better job of that than I think the previous regime. So yeah, I'm with you. I like the direction of this offense, especially with some of the talent injection.
But the play action, it's honestly a question of whether or not they're going to be good enough in the drop back game. The play action game is where they thrived last year. I was looking at this on play among players with at least 250 dropbacks last season. Kyler was fourth in success rate. The only guys ahead of him were Brock Purdy, Geno, this is just playing into my agenda, and Lamar Jackson. Those are the only three guys who had a better dropback success rate on play action than Kyler last year. Without play action, here are the guys who were worse than Kyler last year: Will Levis, Kenny Pickett, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Bryce Young. So you go from being one of the best quarterbacks in the league off play action to one of the worst quarterbacks in the league without play action. There are reasons for this, but I think that bridging that gap and allowing them to have a little bit more consistent success on drop back concepts generally, that is going to be one of the biggest things that this offense has to do this year.
Are you confident they can get there? Because I kind of
So,
am based on why it went wrong last year. But
So I think why it went wrong last year is twofold. One, drop back game, it helps to have talent advantages in some of these spots.
Exactly.
And so
And
they
also
had no talent advantages.
And they were all small. Everybody was a
Yes.
Smurf in this receiving core.
So now, like, you get to a place where, like, the drop back game, you can have a one-on-one that you can pick on, and you're like, this is the backside isolated receiver. If he's better than the other guy, we're going to be okay. Who are the best drop back teams in the NFL over the last 3 or 4 years? It's the Bengals, right? Like, if you have those dudes, it's a lot easier to be a good drop back team. So putting Marvin Harrison into this equation, I think, is a big part of it. And then I think the offensive line also, their weaknesses show up when you're running a lot of drop back. You can hide them in the play action game. So I don't think this is necessarily just a Kyler shortcoming thing. I think it's more about everything else around him. And you would hope that everything else around him takes a step forward this year.
Okay. I was just trying to force you into the this isn't Kyler's fault talk. So I'm glad I got where I wanted to go.
What do you think his actual ceiling is? If we're going to say, yes, if we're going to say this offense is going to set him up for success. We feel good about Petzing. We feel good about Marvin. Michael Wilson takes a step forward. We like Trey McBride. They're going to live in 12 personnel. Tip Ryman gives them more as a pass catcher than his profile might suggest. The offensive line can be an average group. What is Kyler's ceiling as a quarterback in that sort of circumstance?
I mean, I don't know how to frame it production wise necessarily because I think there's plenty of examples where a quarterback can outplay where I would rank them. But I think there's a world where Kyler can be like the seventh best quarterback in the league. I don't think that that's that crazy. Like he's done it before. He's played to that level before. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of getting him back there and also keeping him on the field because he's hurt all the time. But we've seen him play at that level with truthfully like a much less put together offensive scheme. And so now if he's getting a little bit more help schematically, maybe the offensive line can take a step. Like I don't think him playing at a definitively top 10 level is that crazy. I mean, I'm also coming from a perspective where I think he's already closer to that right now than probably a lot of people
Yeah.
do, but I really don't think that that's off the table.
The reason that I think that that's not crazy is because when I watched him last year and I was frustrated by him, again, it was in moments where he just didn't feel comfortable, right? Like he's drifting in the pocket or he's unsettled in the pocket more than he has to be based on how clean the look is, or he's slow to recognize something. The pick six against the Niners in his first start is a perfect example, right? They're running mesh. Then they're calling it on third down because they think they're going to get man. They don't get man. He is late to that route over the ball that's supposed to be your zone answer. It gets picked and taken to the house. After that play, he knew immediately he was late. And talking to the coach there, he was late on it and he admitted that. Now he's just seeing things so much faster as they head into year two, where last year it was about what is the play? Do I know the play? Now it's I know the intent of the play. I know what we're trying to accomplish with this play. And so you get a little bit more comfort, a little bit more fluency in some of these things. Do those areas of frustration for me start to fall away a little bit? And do the strengths and the flashes become even more prevalent? And if that ratio changes, I don't think it's crazy to think that he can be the eighth best quarterback in the league. I don't think that's insane, even if I think it's a little bit ambitious.
I think it's fair to say it might be ambitious. And two, the other thing to keep in mind, truthfully, like quarterback 7 through 12 oscillates almost every year anyway. Like those
Yeah,
guys kind of cycle up and down the thing. So if I think going in that he's quarterback 12 or 13 already, for him to jump up, 3, 4 spots is really not that crazy to me.
I think that's fair. I do not think that that's crazy. What is keeping you up at night with this Cardinals team? I think we both have the same answers for this, and we don't have to spend a ton of time detailing the specifics of it.
They just don't have horses on defense, man.
Yeah,
Buda Baker's a star. Kaiser White is actually I used to hate him as a player, but he's actually kind of a solid guy. They've got one or two other pieces maybe, but they've got a lot of either young guys or just replacement level players who are having to start for them.
their plan here as a front office and what they were trying to do as a new regime, I think was pretty simple. It was literally like, let's clear the decks. Let's change our process for how we try to identify players. I mean, this is a GM and a front office previously. They had the same lineage for like 30 years. I mean, it was all guys that they had hired in house over and over and over again. And so I think just bringing in somebody to refresh the way that they approached player evaluation and acquisition, there was benefits to that. So that was year one. Year two, I think, was truly about how can we try to restock this roster with rookie contract players? Because if you look at what the hauls were from the last like 4 or 5 drafts, there are no players on this team. I mean, they're trading picks away for everybody. They're trading a pick for DeAndre Hopkins. They're trading picks for Hollywood Brown. Like did so much. Rodney Hudson, like
They
all of these
traded down
aging
in the
guys.
draft so that they could get more picks even.
Yes, and yes, and so I think that this was about can we change what the complexion of the roster looks like, and you're starting to see that happen. So now it's like, can Max Melton do something for us in year one? What does Michael Wilson look like? What does Paris Johnson look like? So just that's the goal here. Even if they don't have the pieces, it's really just about changing the complexion of the roster, and you can't do all of that in year one or even into year two and be good. So I just think there's an expectation that they're probably going to be a bad defense again, but based on how much of an overall needed to happen for this team specifically, I don't think that that's necessarily the worst thing in the world. Like it's an expectation at this point.
That's a great point. Like, I'm not necessarily criticizing them for the roster, like this regime for the roster being at where it's at, because it was really the fault of the previous regime and they had a lot to clean up. And to your point, with how bad the roster was on both sides of the ball, there was no fixing both of them at the same time this fast, right? And so for them
Yeah.
to just be like, all right, let's fix the side of the ball where we have a quarterback we think can play at a top 10, 12 level, that makes a lot of sense.
My frustration is they're not going to be able to get looks at some of these young defensive front pieces this year, right? Like Ojulari missing the entire season is a huge bummer with a guy who you spent a second round pick on last year who had some interesting flashes. Spending a first round pick on Darius Robinson, he's going to miss at least the first 4 games with that calf injury, maybe more. So now not getting full seasons from those guys that you've spent a lot of investment on, that's tough. Like that part of it sucks. But the defensive line in general, I cannot describe to you how much better this group should probably be in 2024 than it was last year. So they bring in Justin Jones, they bring in Bilal Nichols, and they're not world beaters. But last season, this team got a combined 1,500 snaps from Dante Stills, Jonathan Ledbetter, and Kevin Strong on the interior of their defensive line. Ledbetter and Kevin Strong are not on rosters right now.
Like any roster.
Rosters.
Oh, wow.
They are current free agents. And that team, they played 1,500 combined snaps for this team last year. So even going to like workable NFL players who are veterans is so much better than they were dealing with before. So you have that up front. You can get Robinson back healthy. Gardeck and Zaven Collins are weird guys that do fit this defense. Mac Wilson and Kaiser White are professionals at linebacker. We feel good about the safety room with Jalen Thompson and Budda Baker. You bring in Max Melton as a second round pick. Garrett Williams, who you drafted in the 3rd round last year, he had the inside track from the start to be your nickel, and then they bring in Sean Murphy-Bunting in free agency. So the talent is better than it was, but it's a lot of like stopgap talent. So I think it's really just about, can we see some ascension from the young guys that you drafted? And can Nick Rallis, who did a lot of weird shit as their defense coordinator last year, kind of a diet version of the Brian Flores conversation, can the weird shit be more effective when you have slightly better players who are trying the weird shit?
And that's a good way to frame it. Like it is important to keep in mind how bad it actually was last year, and that even getting to decent replacement level players in some spots is actually a kind of a saving grace.
What are you most excited about watching with this year's Cardinals team?
The offense, man. Like they just have so many cool things going on. You know me, I'm a Kyler guy. We've gone back and forth on this. Petzing, we just like both said how good of a coordinator he seems to be already. Paris Johnson, I think has been a promising tackle for them. That's a great spot. You drop in a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., who is one of the just cleanest, almost like surefire. This guy can get you 1,000 yards type of receiver. And especially to somebody with size and somebody who can just definitively win outside, which they did not have last year. So that I think is a huge thing. Obviously, Trey McBride is kind of in that like second tier of tight ends, and I think there's a chance that he could just continue to get better and he could really jump up a little bit. And then honestly, Michael Wilson, I think there's something to him, especially now if he's like getting knocked down the ladder a little bit when you bring in Marvin Harrison Jr., who's going to be your alpha. So there's a lot to like here.
This is maybe a bad comparison. The Michael Wilson thing is kind of similar to me with like Michael Pittman, where it's like if he's your number 2, you feel much better about that. And I think that you need an alpha to make that construction of the room work. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is that alpha. So, I mean, obviously, Michael Pittman has had a lot more success than Michael Wilson has as an NFL player. But I think archetype wise, that's kind of how I would think about it. And I do think he showed a lot of flashes last year. So that receiver room with McBride and with the running game that we're talking about, I'm with you. I'm looking forward to it. What I was most excited about is Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. Like both of those guys together as pass catchers in the same offense for what we think is a well-designed offense with competent, capable quarterback play. I'm looking forward to watching that this season.
And the Harrison thing, we've seen what Kyler looks like when he has a very obvious outside receiver to just spam the ball to. I don't know if, Marvin Harrison Jr. is immediately going to be as good as peak DeAndre Hopkins, but we have at least seen Kyler with this type of player before.
Most important supporting characters for this year's Cardinals team are?
I would say Jonah Williams on the right side of the offensive line. To me, I have not been the biggest Jonah Williams fan when he was with the Bengals the last few years. So if he can give them even serviceable play on the right side, that would be great. And then Max Melton starting it outside. You kind of mentioned they really need some of these young defensive guys to hit. I think if Max Melton could really give them something on the outside right away, that would be sweet.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Just again, the young pieces all around. I had Jonah Williams as well, just because I think if the offensive line is capable, the rest of this offense has a chance to really take off. The interior of the offensive line is interesting. Like they brought in Evan Brown in free agency. They drafted John Gaines last year in the 4th round. He had a really promising offseason last year, but then tore his ACL. And it feels like he just wasn't all the way back in terms of cracking that starting lineup. And then Isaiah Adams is somebody they drafted in the 3rd round this offseason. He just is not there yet. So my hope is on the interior specifically, what they get from Furholt being a good fit for this system. Can we get to a place next year where Paris is a good left tackle? You have Adams and Gaines potentially being able to step into those roles and start with Froholt, and then you have Jonah Williams still there at right tackle. So then you've got some cheap young pieces that you've drafted who are starters for you, and the whole idea of what the roster is and the offense is can really start coming together. So they weren't ready yet. I think the hope is by next year, those are people that are willing to compete for starting roles. What counts as a successful season in your mind for the Arizona Cardinals?
The offense taking the step that I think we both seem to hope that they can take and think that they will take. So I would say that's the starting point. And then kind of to that end, just be a frisky team that is like a tough out in the sense of you're just going to be in shootouts. Because you can either be a team that's going to keep a lot of low scoring games and be frisky, or you can just be a team that's going to make the other team score 30 to beat you. I think there's a world where the Cardinals can be that team and still find a way to win like 7-8 games and just be annoying.
The path that I would lay out, and we've talked about over the last couple of years with this team, is the path that the Lions were on. So you come in year one, it's all about play style, attitude. How competitive does this team feel? Does it feel like the arrow is at least pointed in the right direction? The answer was yes. It was a very similar situation as what the Lions were dealing with. Lions got Aiden Hutchinson as part of that equation. Cardinals get Marvin Harrison as part of that equation. You go to year two in Detroit. Ben Johnson showed us he was one of the guys. This is one of the dudes to pay attention to. They finished 7th in offensive DVOA that year. Can the Cardinals do that? I don't think they have to finish in the top 10 for this to be considered a success, but are we talking about this offense in the same way we were talking about the Lions offense in 2022, where they snuck up on us a little bit and we we're like, oh shit, like this group there is something here. They are working with something here. If that is the dialogue about the Cardinals offense by the end of this season, even if they finish 11th or whatever it is, and you have some guys from the last 2 drafts that pop, Melton, whoever they end up being, that to me is a success. Even if they win 5-6 games, you'd hope they're closer to like 7-8 and like fighting to get a wild card. But I think more like the specifics about who they are will determine how we feel about this season overall.
That's a good point with the line specifically, like, because again, after that second year, even though they were clearly much better, you weren't sure that the following year was going to be any better, but you were like, man, it feels like they're heading in the right direction and they've got enough of these young pieces that this is on track. So yeah, if they can get there, that's a great spot.